Hey, it's After Hours with Tim and Guy, and obviously you've noticed I'm wearing a tie today, and I'm wearing it for a specific reason. So, Tim, I'm going to
Why?
ask you a question.
All
Do
right.
you know who Honor Blackman was?
Nice to see you, Guy. Big day in the markets. Honor Blackman. Sorry. Joan Jett's backup singer.
No, that's incorrect. I like it's a valiant
It's a good
try
try.
by you,
Love Joan
but
Jett,
it's
by the
wrong.
way. Okay.
So,
Yeah.
Honor Blackman, actually, her greatest role was as a Bond villain in the movie Goldfinger, and her name in the movie, and I'm just stating her name, was, of course, Pussy Galore.
Look, I mean, if you're going to be a Bond girl, that's probably the best name you can have.
Well, hold on. I just want to clarify. She wasn't a Bond girl. She was a Bond villain. There's a subtle but important difference. Anyway, let's just deviate quickly before we go down a rabbit hole that we can't recover from. And
Can I ask you a question? Can I ask you a quick question about James Bond? Who is your favorite Bond? Because I got to tell you, Roger Moore is forgettable. In fact, his best work was in like the Cannonball Run with Adrian Barbeau.
Yeah, no. Roger Moore. I don't listen. Sean Connery to me is James Bond, but I got to tell you something. Daniel Craig is a stud.
What a nice six-pack, man.
You
know. Yeah.
So if you're asking me if I had to put them all against each other, I mean, Connery's sort of he is the guy, but Daniel Craig and the Daniel Craig Bond movies have been spectacular. My opinion.
By the way, I'm not. I think Daniel Craig is on my wife's freebie list, just in case for people to know what that is.
I'm sure Daniel's watching right now. I'm sure he'll be happy to hear that. So again, we're going down a dangerous rabbit hole, but Goldfinger, one of my favorite Bond movies for a lot of different reasons, but we're going to talk about the broader market. But gold is a story, Tim, and I know it's something we go back and forth about, but gold continues to sort of move to the upside, having a few weeks where obviously it's sold off, but now it seems to be back on the horse. Does that mean anything to you at all?
Look, I think gold is there's a combination of things that drive gold prices. They include buying of central banks. They include some expectations of inflation or lack thereof, or deflation. Karen Feinerman often likes to point out, pick a reason and you can rationalize a gold purchase around that, or so we've had the market do that. What I like about what gold is doing over the last week is what I like about the market right now. And I may be in the minority. I think there's still a lot of pessimism for a strong day in the market. And I realize, you don't necessarily have to run in by the market tomorrow after it's moved 7% and is up 21.2% in 13 days. But here's what I have to say. Asset classes are trading as they're supposed to. Gold should be rallying. Let's be really clear. The amount of money it's being, the helicopter money, Helicopter Ben, Helicopter Jerome, we've got to give him another name. Let's call him, Supersonic Jerome. I mean, this is insane, and gold should be rallying. I think, back to our man, Roger Moore or James Bond or whoever, the fact that the bond market also has actually started to sell off on yield, not a major move, but the way equities are moving, and the way, if you believe that today was a snapshot of how the markets might be slowly healing, that bonds should be selling off on a day like this, that we clearly rallied flight to quality on bonds. We got to absurdly low levels. But if you think we're getting a little bit of health to the economy or clarity on the virus, and these are two things that are impossible to judge right now, I'm just telling you, markets traded well today, including bonds and gold doing what they did.
Yeah, and I do think, I think the S&P closed today 2660-ish, thereabouts. I got to go back and look. And, I think this 2790 level in the S&P, which is another 5% or so from where we closed, makes a lot of sense. And just in terms of a math problem, it's a 50% retracement of that recent S&P low, that 2191 low, the recent all-time high of 3393. Do the math, and, 2790 makes a lot of sense. In my opinion, I'm hard-pressed to believe it's just going to go ratcheting through to the upside given the environment we find ourselves in. Obviously, I hope I'm wrong. I just don't know how we get to that point. But that's what makes markets.
No, it's very difficult right now to talk about markets being able to, we do this V-shaped. I don't want to do that. What I want to say is I do think that the pessimism coming off a day like today and a lot of circles, and you're you're pessimistic about where we have to go before we can really improve. And I would just say this: people talked about the VIX and the move from 80 down to the mid-low 40s, and maybe it should be lower, but still at an inflated level. People look at what the VIX did from mid-October to the first week of November of 2008, and they saw that the VIX fell 50%, just like it's fallen now. And then they'll point out that from November 4th through November 15th, the VIX then rallied 85% and destroyed people effectively into year end before we finally found our bottom in March of 2009. I still don't believe we have to do the exact same thing. And I believe that markets and market participants tend to still be overly fatalistic about that outcome.
Yeah, that's fair. I'm not suggesting we have to do anything. I think you're right. Listen, you'd love to have some clarity. And my biggest concern, other than the obvious, other than the health and humanitarian concerns, which we all share, is the fact that I can paint a scenario where, given the amount of time that people have been home and learning to do effectively more with less, there's a chance that the consumer on the back end of this thing comes out a much different individual in terms of spending habits. And we're talking about an economy that's 73% driven by people buying stuff. If people fundamentally change, and I'm just suggesting, I obviously don't know, that for our economy is problematic. It might be a great thing for society, but for our economy, it might not be such a great thing. So that's sort of my overriding concern here, Tim.
Look, I think you're right. And by the way, those leather those chairs you have around you, or the leather, it's very Mortimer Duke.
Right.
And
people pointed that out.
Well, I saw that, and they almost look like catcher's mitts or something.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's interesting. I don't know. You an Odd Couple fan, and I know we're sort of bumping up against it, but there was an episode in the Odd Couple where,
of course,
Felix and Oscar got like very new wave furniture, and one of the chairs was a glove, and Oscar made a pretty funny crack during the show. I'm a huge Odd Couple fan. If you have time on your hands, you should binge watch
Oscar.
But
yeah.
these, as much as these chairs might look nice, they're some of the most uncomfortable chairs I've ever been in, because you can't sit in them. Once you're in it, you slide off. It's one of those slides you go with the blanket. You go down. That's exactly what I'm doing here.
Well, speaking of the whole sliding and kneeling down, I mean, they look like catcher's mitts. And if I had it, and if I could extend the conversation briefly, I have to ask you. It's April 6th. Do you
Here's
think?
Gary Sanchez. I know where it's. I know where
do
you're
you
going.
think at this point, with the difficulty he has behind the dish, Dirty Sanchez would have been benched at this point?
Yeah. The short answer is no, number one. And the second answer is there's not one person on the Mets, not one, including the Grominator, that I would take over Gary Sanchez. I'm just telling you. And you want your koala bear and the squirrel and those other people. J.D. Davis, who plays left field like he's picking up landmines. I'll give you all those guys.
But J.D. Davis is a fourth outfielder and a ninth infielder. Everybody knows that. And everybody also knows the absurdity of the statement that you would take Dirty Sanchez over the polar bear. And with that, it's After Hours with Tim and Guy. Guys, see you tomorrow.
We'll pick this up again.
We sure will.